perspectives from different users. I might have a different definitions and you might have different definitions from our perspective. අපි දකින විදිය අනුව. මං කියවනේ මේක theory එකක් නෙමෙයි. මේක practices. අද practice කියන එක පුද්ගලයාගෙන් පුද්ගලයාට subjective වෙන්න පුළුවන්. Practices of good things, good practices. How the company should be directed and controlled. Company direct කරන්න ඕනේ, control කරන්න ඕනේ කොහොමද කියන එක ගැන අපි මේ හොඳ practices, good practices ගැන කතා කරන්නේ. එතකොට ඒකට definitions, if we take 5 different people will give 5 different definitions from the user. So these are the few aspects that we will talk about today. So operational aspect, relationship aspect, stakeholder aspect, financial economics aspect and societal aspect. So these are not the only definitions, but few of the definitions depending on the owner in use. Okay. So first one, operational activities of the business, basically the manufacturing, the production activities. So this definition is in the aspect of that. Now we know day-to-day activities, it's a process. You have the inputs and there's a process and there's an output. So from that aspect, there is this definition is given. So if we read it, corporate governance is the system by which companies are directed and controlled. So corporate governance is a system. It's a system. Now production is a system. So what do you have in the system? What do you have in the system? System එක මොනවද තියෙන්නේ? Elements. So what are the elements? Basic elements. Basically, if we take now procedures, activities, if we take all of it together, you have in a system, you have inputs and you have the process and you have the output. Input, process and output. Inputs, procedures and output. So corporate governance is this system which companies are directed and controlled. So what do you think the inputs of corporate governance is? So if we look corporate governance as this process or a system, can you just suggest the inputs, the process of outputs of corporate governance? Corporate governance කියන එක system එකක් විදිහට දකිනවා නම් ඒකට අදාළ වෙන inputs කියන්නේ මොනවද? Process කියන්නේ මොනවද? Output එක කියන්නේ මොකක්ද? Can you suggest? Element by element, input, ethic, guidelines, principles, okay, codes, policies are the inputs. Okay, I think you are correct, but I would rather suggest it's something like this. Now governance is a process, input, process and output. So input in the sense, now I told you owners have to communicate all the aspirations, their aspirations to the board of directors. So that is the basic input. Board එකට input එකක් ඕන. So what are the inputs are the aspiration of the owners or the shareholders. And then I told you what the board have to do. The board, what they are doing is they convert that it into the business language. So that is the process. You know, in converting that, the aspiration to the business language, you make the policies, procedures, along with all the vision, mission, objectives, and everything. Those are the process. Okay. Then output is what? Output is how it is being directed and controlled, that you run the business according to those the process that you have, good governance system, good practices. So you can interpret this in different aspects. I agree with all your answers also, but we'll put that in that way. Inputs are the aspirations of the shareholders, then the process is the guidelines, ethics, principles, and everything, and output is good practices. So this is the whole thing which the companies are directed and controlled. So to direct and to control, you need this entire process. Policies and guidelines are not enough. That is, to have good policies and guidelines in place, you need to have an input. That is, you have to understand the aspiration of your shareholders. Then only you can make whatever the principles, procedures, systems that are in place. Okay, and then you can control the output. You can see whether whether your aspiration or your objectives that you set are in line, are in line with what you expect. That is the operational perspective. So if we talk this in detail furthermore, this definition explains the two bodies in detail. Explain the responsibility of board of director and the role of shareholder. This definition implies that board of directors are responsible for the governance. That is, they are responsible to direct and control. They are responsible to run this process. And what the shareholders' role is to appoint the directors and other parties, basically the directors, the governing body, and to communicate their aspiration to the directors. So there's two separate things. Board is responsible in good governance practices, in directing and controlling, in running this entire system. The role is the shareholders are not responsible. They have a role to play. Board එක responsibility එකක් ගන්න. Shareholders ට තියෙන role එකක් play කරන්න. What is their role? To appoint board of directors and to communicate their aspiration to the board of directors. That is their role. And this definition focuses on these two bodies, shareholders and board of directors. So that this definition highlight the interaction between these two bodies. මේ parties දෙක අතර තියෙන interaction එක මෙන්න මේ definition එකෙන් highlight කරනවා. By looking it as a systematic perspective, operational activity එකක් විදිහට ඒ දිහා බලන. Any questions in this definition? Okay. So the next one, relationship perspective. Can you all read it? The slide. The relationship among various participants in determining the direction and performance of cooperation. What do you mean by various participants? What is the meaning of this? Who are the various participants? Can you suggest? Who are the participants? Stakeholders. Contractual stakeholders. So there are different answers, but basically you are telling stakeholders. In this point, on this point of the definition, what they mean by the participants is shareholders, management, which is led by the CEO, and board of directors only. මෙතනදී මේ participants කියලා මේගොල්ලෝ focus එක දෙන්නේ මේ definition එකේදී. Your answers are not wrong, but if we concentrate on this development of this particular definition, what they focus as participants are the shareholders, management, which is led by the CEO, and the board of directors only. So in 2001, they say its corporate governance is how these three bodies, shareholder, management, and board of directors, direct and performance of the corporation, how their activities are directed and how they are performed. That is what corporate governance is. How these three participants are determining the direction and performance of corporation. ඒගොල්ලෝ කොහොමද මෙන්න මේ business එක run කරන්නේ? මෙන්න මේ participants තුන් දෙනා. මේ definition එකේදී focus කරන්නේ. මෙන්න මේ කට්ටිය කොහොමද මේ business එක run කරන්නේ කියන දේ තමයි corporate governance වලින් කියන්නේ. It's further explained by the second definition. Corporate governance structure specifies distribution of rights and responsibilities among different participants in the organization, board, management, and the shareholders. So if we compare the previous slide, operational slide, and the relationship slide, in the relationship definition, we can say this perspective strengthens the operational perspective. This relationship perspective strengthens the operational perspective. Operational perspective එක තව ටිකක් ශක්තිමත් කරනවා. Operational perspective එකේ මේ participants ලා ඉන්න කට්ටියව හරියට explain කරන්නේ නැහැ. ඒගොල්ලෝ කියන්නේ company එක direct කරන්න control කරන්න system එක තමයි corporate governance කියන්නේ. Relationship perspective එකෙන් කියනවා shareholders ला, managers ला, board of directors මෙන්න මේ තුන්ගොල්ලොන්ගේ direction එක performance කරන්නේ කොහොමද කියන එක තමයි corporate governance කියන්නේ. මේක තව ටිකක් strengthen කරනවා, ශක්තිමත් කරනවා relationship perspective එක. Clear? Any reaction? Can you okay, clear. Then moving forward, the next perspective, that is the stakeholder perspective. Now corporate governance as an activity, corporate governance as a relationship. Now we say we have come to the point that you suggested, that is stakeholders. They say corporate governance is the process. It's a process by which the corporations are made responsive to the rights and wishes of stakeholders. අර වගේ තමයි. Rights and wishes. මිනිස්සු මුළු stakeholders ලා ඉන්න හැම stakeholder කෙනෙක්ගේම rights and wishes වලට අපි response කරන්නේ කොහොමද කියන. How you are responding to the rights and wishes of all the stakeholders. So, who are the stakeholders in here? Who are the stakeholders? Is it just the shareholder, board of director, and management? Stakeholders? Can you suggest here what do you mean by stakeholders? Yes, employee, government, all interested parties, or rather we can say in everyone who are being impacted by the activities of the company, or who or anyone who can make an influence to the activities of the company. Company එකේ activities වලින් impact වෙන සහ company එකේ activities වලට impact එකක් කරන්න පුළුවන් any party එක. It's a wider view of those involved and affected by the company's activity. So you have to take every one of them in concern. It's a process. Governance as a process that take place the interests, rights and wishes of how you respond to all the parties that are being involved. So you see, now this definition that was developed in 1992, but if you can remember in the first lecture in 1970s also, there was a proposal to look after all the stakeholders, but it was not practiced. But later on, after many years, now this has been practiced, and even today also as a new thing we are practicing it. අදත් අපි මේ අලුත් දෙයක් වගේ මේක practice කරනවා. නමුත් ඔක ඉස්සර කාලේ ඉඳන් තිබ්බ දෙයක්. stakeholders ලා ගැන හිතන්න කියන එක. Even in a sole trade business, owners are responsive to the rights and wishes of, yes, for all the stakeholders. Even in sole trade business, everyone is responsive. That is there. But here we are talking about the corporate governance is not definite concept. Corporate governance, as I told you, there's no definite definition as such. I told you it's a development depending on the user of it. If I am more concerned about my stakeholders, this would be my definition. If one person is more concerned about the money that you make, he would be giving a definition from the finance perspective. That is why in the very beginning of the lecture, I put down different perspectives of different users. So this is the stakeholder perspective. This is also not wrong. මේකත් වැරදි නැහැ. මේකට corporate governance කියනකට boundary එකක් නැහැ. boundary එකක් සමහරක් අයට කියන්න පුළුවන්. governance වලින් අපි concern කරන්න ඕනේ shareholder, board of director, management එක විතරයි. නමුත් තව කෙනෙක්ට කියන්න පුළුවන් නැහැ. entire stakeholders ගැනම concern කරන්න ඕනේ. So when you are concerning about the stakeholders, I don't know whether you have learned this. Have you heard about the Mendelov matrix? Here I have put down the Mendelov matrix. It's a matrix. You have two axes, the level of interest and power. Here in this axis you have the level of interest. This axis you have power. Okay, so depending on the interest and the power, you have to categorize your stakeholders. Who are the key players? Who are to give the minimum effort? Who are to keep satisfied? Who are to keep informed? Likewise, for all the stakeholders, treating everyone equally is not possible. හැමෝටම එක වගේ සලකන්න බෑ. එහෙනම් අපි කරන්න ඕනේ stakeholder perspective එකේ කියනවා you have to concern about stakeholders, but you have to identify your stakeholders correctly. One way of identifying is using this Mendelov matrix, using their interest and power. Stakeholders අතර තියෙන interest එක මොකක්ද? ඒගොල්ලන්ට තියෙන power එක මොකක්ද? Now this matrix, some say it's not clear, but let's see, I can zoom it. Now okay? Level of interest and power. So depending on the interest, depending on the power, then stakeholder කෙනෙක්ට company එක ගැන තියෙන උනන්දුව සහ ඒ කෙනාට තියෙන බලය මත අපිට stakeholders ලා categorize කරන්න පුළුවන්. එහෙම කරලා අපිට stakeholders ලා ගැන concern කරන්න පුළුවන්. දැන් board of director කෙනෙක්ට තියෙන සැලකිල්ල customer කෙනෙක්ට තියෙන නැති වෙන්න පුළුවන්. press කට්ටියට තියෙන නැති වෙන්න පුළුවන්. pressure group එකකට තියෙන නැති වෙන්න පුළුවන්. මේ හැමෝම stakeholders. ඕගොල්ලෝ දැනගන්න ඕනේ කම්පැනි එක මේ කට්ටිය මේ categorization එකෙන් කොතනද ඉන්න කොතනද කියලා බලලා ඒගොල්ලෝගේ ඕන ක්‍රියාපිළිවෙල අපි හොදා ගන්න ඕනේ. Now if it's a key player, if their interest is high, power is high, then it's a key player. You have to get these particular stakeholders, pay more attention to these stakeholders. If their interest is very low and the power is low, power කියන්නේ මේ company එකේ activities වලට බලපෑම් කරන්න පුළුවන් බලය. අඩුයි නම් you don't have to worry much about those. Minimal effort. So that's what it means. Even though the definition says that you have to concern the rights and wishes of all the stakeholders, practically you cannot do that in an equal basis. The best way is to categorize your stakeholders depending on their level of interest and power, and then give the priority based on that. Key players ලා minimum effort එක තියෙන්න ඕනේ, satisfy කරන්න ඕනේ. අදගෙන ඒගොල්ලොන් ඒ categorization එකේ ඉන්න අය equally consider කරන්න. Key players ලාට equally. Minimum effort එකක් නම් ඒ categorization එකේ ඉන්න stakeholders ලාට equal. That's what it means. So I'll show you a video that was from Toyota company. Now, how they are concerned with stakeholders. One good example for corporate governance, good practices in the perspective of stakeholders. So let's watch that and come back to the lesson again. If we look at the chat, there are some questions as what the CG and what CSR is. Well, corporate governance, you can't say it's more focused on shareholders. Shareholders, I told you, is a basis of power. Shareholders, why we talk about shareholders and board of directors is because of this separation, the corporate governance, good governance practices have evolved. CSR is inside the good governance practices. We do CSR as a good governance practice. So corporate governance is a broader thing. In that broader thing, CSR is practices. So through CSR, we focus on stakeholders. We give back to community. So that is corporate governance. Are you clear with that? For those the people who asked that question,